Good morning, everybody. My name's Ben. Lovely to see you this morning. Let's quickly start with a question. What's it about the dark and about darkness? Dark and darkness. We don't seem to like it. Crimes often seem to happen in the darkness. Evil in sort of films and stories often seems to be portrayed in the darkness. We might talk about sufferings and difficulties as dark times in our lives. And when we don't understand something, we might feel like we're in the dark. As a family, we went to Nando's, a rare opportunity to eat out. But I don't know about you, but I don't like menus when you don't have pictures or enough pictures. Because what are you actually buying into? You can read it and think it sounds all lovely, which in Nando's is basically chicken and spice in some variation. But what are you actually getting? And thankfully my choice was good, but I felt like I was stabbing in the dark, if you will. We don't often like those moments when we don't understand something fully. Biblically, there are two key words. Let's bring up one of them on the screen. That represent darkness, or talk about darkness. Let's have a little quick go at this. This word is pronounced choshek. So without spitting on the person in front of you, have a go at this. Choshek. Choshek. Never have I seen so much hocking in church. Lovely. Choshek. This idea represents a whole range of different uses, used 80 different times. It covers a sense of physical darkness, but also of sinfulness, of judgment, of chaos, of emptiness, and even death. Darkness. It's often the lack of something good, the opposite of that. We often live, don't we, with some form of choshek, darkness in our lives. But sometimes powerful and positive things happen in the dark places. That sleep heals and restores us. The universe itself, according to Genesis 1, was created out of the darkness. When Moses approaches Mount Sinai, it says that God is shrouded in thick darkness. There's something powerful. The beauty, if you like, of a starry night is that amidst all of the vast darkness, there are bright lights that shine in the midst of it. And so God's light often shines into our darknesses, if that's a word. A chapter today largely happens in the dark. Abraham has a night vision. He has a dream or nightmare, if you will. Other things happen at sunset when the sun is going down. There's a sense of darkness, but bigger than that is a sense of darkness in terms of suffering and a lack of understanding, which we will draw out today. And this passage seems to me to reveal that God might meet us in the dark powerfully at times, but also he might leave us in the dark powerfully at times, or purposefully even. This chapter seems to be divided into two main sections. Flip on to the next slide for us. The two main promises that God makes to Abraham. Don't worry about the text, but two sections. Promises of descendants, promises of land. And in terms of the context, we're somewhere between the 10 years when Abraham has left Haran and his family, and then the abuse of Hagar. We're somewhere in this sort of 10-year period. We don't really know exactly. He's left his family behind. He's been petrified of the Egyptians killing him for his stunningly beautiful wife. He survived the violent conflict, as Dan talked about last week. But what's he feeling now? Where's he at in this sort of 10 years? Where's the promises? How is this all kind of happening? Is this all so straightforward? Would it be fair to say that Abraham is in some form of dark place? Doubt, confusion, lack of understanding, even our hero of faith. As we're reading this passage, we're going to start with verses 1 to 6. Hear what stands out to you. Let's read this. So, Genesis 15. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision, a night vision. Do not be afraid, Abraham. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abraham said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me, since I remain childless? And the one who's going to inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abraham said further, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household is going to be my heir. And the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. And he took him outside and he said, look up at the stars of the sky and count them, if indeed you can count them. And then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Abraham seems grumpy. From what I've heard, the Hebrew makes it sound even more so. He's curt, he's abrupt with God. Was it disappointment? Was it doubt? Was it despair? We can kind of try to fill in the gaps and see. But in his darkness, God meets Abraham and lifts his eyes and says, look, come away from your pain and lack and see what it is that I am going to provide for you. And amazingly, Abraham's faith in that place lit up. He's changed. But God had more in store to try to make sure Abraham had trust and confidence in his commitment. Because we do this, don't we? Sometimes we like to add visual, formal, or official elements to our agreements to kind of add an extra level of confidence to what we are doing, a sort of a sign that strengthens trust, like the shaking of hands. Apparently, my son tells me the most dirty way to greet somebody, but there you go. We might sign paperwork visually. We might give and exchange rings at a wedding. There are these elements that show something of the commitment that we're wanting to give. Or a biblical one, Genesis 24. Here's one to try if you want to be biblical. Placing your hand under the person's thigh. So if Dan Scott were here, he might say, turn to the person next to you. Visual things, though, that add a sense of commitment and trust. In the Bible, we often call these covenants, formal agreements. And there are many of these ancient practices, but they also involve blood and slicing up animals, and we'll save that for the next part of the story, which it seems quite barbaric to us. But often blood symbolized the life-giving nature of the covenant, but also the possible consequences of that covenant being broken. There's a seriousness to this. Almost a may it happen to me if I break this. I've often been confused by Genesis 15 and the next part of the chapter, but that's because it involves one of these slightly bizarre ancient covenant-making practices. Should we read it? Okay, let's go from 7 to 21 to the end. He also said to him, I'm the Lord who brought you out of Ur of Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. But Abraham said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I'm going to take possession of it? Another moment of potential doubt. So the Lord said to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a pigeon, as you do. Abraham brought all these to God, and then he cut them in two. He arranged the halves on opposite sides of each other. The birds, however, thankfully for them, he left them alone and did not cut them in half. And then the birds of the prey came down to have a feast on the carcasses, but Abraham drove them away. As the sun was setting, Abraham fell into a deep sleep. A thick and dreadful darkness came over him. And the Lord said to him, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, you will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. And in the fourth generation of descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot and a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham and said, to your descendants I will give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river. And here we go with a whole list of names. The land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, and you can read the rest of those for yourselves. Did you notice, though, that Abraham did more than what God had asked? He brought the animals, but he then cuts them. Well, God didn't ask him to do that, but he doesn't seem to complain or criticize him. They both seem to know what they're doing. So, to explain, we've got a slide. There should be an image that kind of goes with this. Next one. So, in the ancient Near East, where Abraham grew up, people who were making an official covenant did this. They would cut the animals in half. I'm not sure quite which way is half, but in half, and they would separate them. And they would make a pathway that they would both walk between. And both the parties who were making the agreement would walk their way down this lovely bloody aisle in the middle of this. And they would both swear the promise, and there would be that sense that if either of them broke the promise, the idea was, may it be to me like this has happened. A strength in their commitment. Serious. In that vein, we should expect to see Abraham and God walk through together, right? That's the cultural practice. But that isn't what happens. We only get this sort of bizarre moment with a smoking fire pot and the torch passing through. Often symbols in the Bible of God's presence. But no Abraham. It doesn't even say that he's woken up from his dream. We presume that he's there and he's witnessing what's happening. But just the smoking fire pot and the smoking torch and the flaming, whichever way around it is. The torch and the pot are both there. The smoke and the flame. No Abraham. It seems that God has made the covenant with himself for Abraham, but he seems to have sworn it by himself. The writer of the Hebrews in the New Testament recalls this. He says, when God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself. So it begs the question, if Abraham isn't involved in the agreement as such, can he break it? Of course not. You can't commit adultery or file for divorce if your name isn't on the marriage certificate in the first place. All right? And theologically, we say this covenant is two things: unilateral and unconditional. Unilateral meaning it's one-sided. God is saying, I'm going to do this, Abraham. On the other hand, it's unconditional in that no human behavior or belief is going to affect it happening. It's unconditional. It's not if and when, Abraham. It's I will. Unilateral and unconditional. Now, that doesn't mean, if we read further in the story, that human belief and behavior doesn't matter. Not at all. Numerous generations of Abraham's descendants end up out of the blessing of the land because of a lack of belief or because of some terrible behavior of the people inside it. Does seem to matter. They get spat out and exiled numerous times. But every single generation that repents, every single person that turns back, it says there is restoration that comes. Paul says this in Romans 9-11. He's explaining the same dilemma. He says it's true. Some people can walk outside of God's unconditional promises, even if it's not based on them. They can't break it, but they may walk outside of it. But ultimately, it's God's gifts and his call are irrevocable, meaning there is something that is impossible to change because God has set his mind to do this, and therefore he will. The land and the descendants will be Abraham's. That's been promised. And beyond that, by walking between the animals, essentially God's put his existence on the line. By saying, if I don't keep this covenant, may it happen to me. God was willing to stake his own existence on that actually happening. So much certainty that Abraham can have. So much faith and confidence, wholehearted. But what happens next? Like, have you ever wondered, once the flaming torch and smoking pot have vanished, well, then what? What's going through Abraham's mind now? What's he thinking? What's he feeling? It must at some point cross his mind the sort of what now? What's going to happen next? Because even though Abraham is somebody that hits the hero of faith status that we should emulate, chapter 16, 17, and 18, and I'm not going to jump too far ahead because that's next week, but show that Abraham and Sarai didn't know what was supposed to happen. They didn't know the plan. And actually big problems happened when they tried to fill in the gaps, where they tried to force it to happen for themselves. The story, I think, serves as a really important example that having covenant confidence in God isn't the same thing as having complete clarity. Having strong faith doesn't necessarily mean knowing the full details. A confidence in God is going to do something that he promised still doesn't necessarily answer the questions of how and when. We find ourselves in the darkness. Like many of us have prayed and believed for revival. We believe God's going to restore the world, but how and when? We find ourselves in that tricky place. And we sometimes find that things don't work out or happen as we expected they would. Where's Lewis? Lewis has got something for us this morning. Lewis has got something he's going to do for us. Morning, Lewis. Oh.
Morning.
Hey. You're only allowed to sing, though, when you're up there, so can you just sing all the time like Life's a Musical? Right, Lewis, what are you going to do for us this morning?
I'm going to play C.
You're going to play C. All right, technical. Christian worship, there's only 4 chords you need to know. There's one of them. So imagine in your head what Lewis is about to do. Some of you musical types. Okay, what's he about to do? He's given us his word. It's going to happen, right? Do it. Go for it.
Can I get some room participation?
Can you get what?
Room participation. Can we all join in?
Bit of participation?
Can we all do a drum roll, please? Like on the
Ooh.
Right, and then I'm going to do this, and you've all got to stop. Ready? Ready? C.
That was C?
Yeah.
That wasn't what I was expecting. Anybody else think that was not what you were expecting? Okay. Got anything else?
Okay. More room participation, ready? Right, so clapping this time. Nice. There once was a ship that put to sea. The name of the ship was a Billy O.T. The wind blew up about it down. I'll blow, I believe I'll go. Oh, the wellermen come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the tongue is done, I'll take our leave and go.
What was that?
It was a sea shanty.
Sea shanty, wee. First time I've ever heard a sea shanty in church. You got anything else for us?
One more maybe. Let's go with it.
Nice.
It's a C9
Musical people,
chord.
is that a C? Mike, is that a C? It's a C.
It was a C9 chord, yeah.
Okay, great. Good. You happy you fulfilled
I can do you
what you
one
said?
more.
Go on then. What songs come to mind?
All of them.
All of them. Great, Lewis, thank you. A little bit of creativity involved, but was Lewis faithful to what he said he was going to do? Yeah. Was there some creativity in how that would play out? Yes. Was that exactly what I expected? No. Even though we discussed it beforehand. Always good when people keep you on your toes. God might not play out his promises exactly how we expect. But does that mean he's unfaithful to his promises? No. We might have faith that God's going to do something, but actually the precise details of how that's going to work in practice, sometimes we need to have the humility to be able to say, it's like that? Okay. Sometimes our most faith-filled responses might actually sometimes say, I don't know. And that isn't necessarily a lack of faith. Sometimes we struggle, don't we, with timings and troubles when it comes to understanding what God says and when it's going to happen and how it's going to work. Many of you will know, but a couple of years ago, our eldest daughter was diagnosed with scoliosis, a natural curve of the spine. She had an S-shaped spine. We believe God absolutely loves us, that he's got great plans for us to prosper us, not to harm us, etc. But here we were facing something almost seeming very opposite to what God had promised. How do you deal with that? We could have stopped believing, but instead we decided to press in prayer to say, all right, God, the maker of heaven and earth, make us straight. You can do it, you made her. If you're going to resurrect us from the dead, well, this isn't going to be too difficult for you. And so many people prayed for us. It was amazing. However, nothing changed. We believe we stood on the promise of God, but how that was working out in practice was a little bit more complicated. We saw the doctors, we looked at the surgery, and we continued praying for God to intervene. In the end, we had 5 failed operation dates. I mean, that was disappointing and hard to deal with. And in between, humble, faith-filled people said to us, well, it's all in God's timing. I've got to be honest, there were points where I grated, well-meaning. Okay, so if you're in the room right now and you said that to us, I'm not criticizing you, honestly. The reason I struggled because I couldn't wholeheartedly say yes and amen to that. I don't think I had the prophetic insight at that moment, the confidence to say, yeah, this is definitely God's timing. Well, sometimes things happen that are just human errors, right? All I felt I could honestly say was, in response, I don't know. Or maybe I hope so. Did I trust in every moment that God had me and that in his perfect plans that he would work things out? Yes. Did I know in the moment exactly what? Well, I felt in the dark. I've got to be honest. I found that quite tricky. Was that a lack of faith? I don't personally believe so. In the end, the final operation date, the hospital was oddly quiet, which is weird for the NHS. Everybody had time available to look after us. And the operation was a huge success. Fantastic. God's timing. He answered lots of prayers. Certainly. Okay, we could have gotten stuck though, couldn't we, in the doubt and the disappointment. At that point, with things not going the way we expected, we could have said, because at times we felt it, why is it not happening? Why not now? What? In our passage, Abraham gets told there's going to be slavery and mistreatment ahead. 400 years of it. Why does God say it? I think it's a heads up for Abraham's descendants to say, don't lose faith. There may be troubles ahead, but they will last only a moment. 400 years maybe, but this moment will pass. Most often when God speaks prophetically in the Bible, there's a lack of time frame in mind. Lack of dates, lack of timelines. Okay, it can be hard to make sense of. For example, Isaiah 61 that we used to sing, this is the year, anybody? Of the favor of the Lord. This is the day of the vengeance of our God. 2 time frame words, markers in there. A year of favor and a day of vengeance. But what are they supposed to mean? That there's actually going to be a full year and a full day? Or when are they going to happen and how's it going to work? It doesn't really say. Is that how we should make sense of it? Some people think this is why the Pharisees missed it when Jesus arrived, because they were expecting both bits, favor and vengeance, at the same time. But that wasn't quite how it played out. Jesus seemed to bring much more of the favor in his coming than he did the vengeance. So what about the vengeance bit? Was that not right? Or was it right, but still to come? And how is that going to play out in practice? If that's true, that means there's like over 2,000 years between that sentence. That's a huge distance. Louis Berkhoff, a biblical scholar, calls this the foreshortening of the prophet's horizon. Meaning, let me put a picture, this will make more sense. Mountain range. You see these from a distance, you think the peaks are close until you get there. And suddenly you realize, oh my goodness, there's miles between peak at the front and the peaks at the back. In one sentence, you might say something that actually has got big time difference. If I say to my kids, when you grow up and you're driving for yourself and you've got married and you've got kids for yourself, then you're going to understand how it feels. I might have said that to my children occasionally. But the time difference between those statements is huge. It's just at that moment when it's given, it's hard to know until you're there that then it will all pan out. And then you think, oh, it's like this. For Abraham, there's a good 25 years between leaving Haran and the birth of Isaac. 25 years of waiting and of uncertainty and of him trying and failing, and you'll find out more about that next week. And there's a good 400 years between the descendants leaving and having to come back and their return to the land. But we also know from the rest of the Bible that the land promise actually never gets fully fulfilled. David and Solomon get really close, but they never quite get there. Why not? Does that mean they failed? Does that mean it's still to come? And then Ezekiel throws a spanner in the works in Ezekiel 47, because he adds a larger set of boundaries and then a different tribal layout in the meantime, a bit more equal. What does that mean? Does that mean there's a bigger bit of promise to come in the future? There's a few nods in the room. I don't know, is my honest answer today. I'm not going to give you a well-scripted answer because I don't know. Do I believe God is faithful to his promises, that his gifts and his call are irrevocable, that it's impossible to change? Yes. Is he committed according to the covenant he made with Abraham to the descendants in the land? Absolutely. Absolutely. Nothing of human behavior is going to affect that. But there are times when we perhaps have to leave the promise fulfillment to the promise maker. How's that all going to pan out? Do we cause ourselves problems if we try to fill in the gaps? God makes himself, at times, absolutely certain about what he's going to do. His unconditional covenants, like to Abraham or to us in the New Testament, show that. We might at times have to say, I don't know, full of faith, but we're in the dark. But what we mustn't do is let any of that darkness, that uncertainty, maybe the despair or the difficulty we find in thinking, God, where is this word that you have given us? Why is it not coming yet and now? And maybe we need to make sure that that doesn't diminish our faith. That our commitment to God and his commitment to us is undeniably clear. In the New Testament, the New Covenant, Jesus makes it absolutely clear, doesn't he? He stakes his life and his own blood on the promise to say, this is how committed I am. Could we ask anything more of him to show that he's committed to our forgiveness and our renewal? We've broken bread on that this morning. What more could he give? Utterly committed. And we can be utterly full of faith. Stars shine in the night sky, and they don't stop shining because the darkness covers most of the sky. This is their moment of glory. It's what they do. Abraham, like him, we need God to lift our eyes and to see again he's absolutely committed. Maybe some of us this morning are in a place where you feel you've gotten beaten back by the difficulties and troubles of life. Or you find yourself in a place of just feeling disoriented with God, I don't even know anymore. Are you committed to it? Are you not committed to it? And for us to come back again to the place of faith, to submit to him with those difficulties and to lift our eyes again, or to have him lift our eyes again. And maybe there are some people who the bit about walking outside of the covenant blessings is relevant to you. You feel like by faith and by poor choices, you're actually walking outside of the covenant. And God wants to restore you to that this morning, because he is absolutely and utterly committed to meeting us in our dark places.